The paper my mother slid across my marble kitchen island wasn't an apology. It was a handwritten list in cheap blue ink filled with bullet points. Every single bullet point ended with a $sign. The grand total at the bottom? $925,000. 9 years ago my family disowned me. They called me a disgrace for marrying David, a brilliant black man they refused to even meet. They left us to struggle in a freezing garage startup while we built our tech firm from the ground up. But now, after our company hit an IPO and my net worth crossed $44 million, my mother suddenly tracked me down. She didn't ask to see her grandchildren. She brought an itemized invoice for her sacrifices. She thought she had cornered me, but she didn't know I spent nearly a decade cataloging every single ounce of their cruelty. As her theatrical tears dried up, I reached under the counter and pulled out a heavy navy blue 3-ring binder. "Mom," I said, my voice dead calm. "You brought a list of what you want. I brought a list of what you did." To understand how my mother ended up standing in my kitchen demanding nearly $1 million, you have to understand the family I was born into. In our household, love was never unconditional. It was a ledger. It was a transaction. My father was a senior partner at a prestigious tax law firm, and my mother was a high-society social climber who viewed her children not as human beings, but as extensions of her personal brand portfolio. Every piano lesson, every private school tuition payment, and every tennis camp wasn't given out of affection. It was an investment they expected to yield a high return in social capital. Growing up, my sister Ashley was the golden child because she complied perfectly. She married a third-generation real estate heir, laughed at the right country club dinners, and let my mother curate her entire life. I, on the other hand, was the analytical one. I studied corporate finance, obsessed over data, and valued raw competence over superficial status. I didn't care about family pedigree, I cared about substance. And then, during my final year of graduate school, I met David. David didn't come from a trust fund or a country club lineage. He was the son of a nurse and a high school teacher, raised in a neighborhood my mother wouldn't even drive through. But David possessed a brilliant, staggering mind. He was a software engineer with a vision for automated regulatory compliance software that was years ahead of anything on the market. When he talked about his ideas, his eyes lit up with a quiet, fierce determination. He was kind, fiercely protective, and treated me like an equal partner in every sense of the word. For the first time in my life, I wasn't being evaluated on a balance sheet. I was loved for exactly who I was. The trouble began the moment I announced our engagement. I remember the dinner vividly. We were at the Greenwich Country Club, sitting at my parents' reserved table. The waiter had just poured the champagne when I pulled out the modest, beautiful ring David had saved up for months to buy me. I smiled, looking at my mother, expecting at least a polite mask of happiness. Instead, the temperature at the table dropped to absolute zero. My mother didn't even look at the ring. She looked directly at David, her eyes narrowed into slits of pure ice. "A garage developer?" she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. "You brought a black, penniless garage developer to our table and expect us to celebrate? Do you have any idea what this will do to our standing? What Ashley's in-laws will say?" My father sat in silence, swirling his scotch, refusing to look up, acting as the silent enforcer of my mother's malice. David remained perfectly composed. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't get defensive. He gently placed his hand over mine and said, "Sir, ma'am, I love your daughter. We are going to build a life together and we are going to build a company together." "Not with our name you won't," my mother snapped, slamming her napkin onto the table. "If you marry this man, Sarah, you are dead to this family. Do you understand me? You will be completely erased." They didn't wait for my answer. My parents stood up and walked out of the dining room, leaving David and me with the bill. I thought that dinner was the peak of their cruelty, but I had severely underestimated my mother's vindictiveness. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived at my tiny apartment. It wasn't a call to reconcile. It was the official disowning letter. It was typed on my father's legal firm letterhead, signed by both of them. The document stated that I was officially severed from the family. They were revoking my access to the residual trust fund my grandfather had set up for my education. They demanded the immediate return of the car they had gifted me for my college graduation, threatening to file grand theft auto charges if the keys weren't dropped off at their estate by 5 p.m. that Friday. Every emergency credit card was canceled. But the final paragraph was the one that cut the deepest. You have chosen to degrade yourself in this family by aligning with someone beneath our standard. Do not contact us. Do not write to us. If you show up at our home, security will turn you away. As far as we are concerned, you no longer exist. I sat on the floor of my apartment, clutching that letter, sobbing until my chest ached. The systemic erasure was total. They didn't just cut me off financially. They attempted to delete my identity, my childhood, and my worth as a human being. When David came home and found me on the floor, he didn't offer empty platitudes. He knelt down, pulled me into his arms, and held me tightly. "Sarah, look at me," he said, his voice steady and grounding. "They think they took away your foundation. But they didn't. We are going to build our own foundation, and it's going to be made of concrete. They want to count you out? Let them. We'll give them front row seats to the countdown." That was the turning point. The grief inside me hardened into something else. It transformed into a cold, clinical, hyper-focused ambition. My family thought they could starve me out, that I would come crawling back on my knees, begging for their approval and their money. They didn't realize they had just unlocked a monster. 2 weeks later, David and I had a courthouse wedding. There were no white designer dresses, no ice sculptures, and no country club receptions. It was just David, me, a justice of the peace, and a city clerk who acted as our legal witness. I wore a $20 sundress, and David wore his only decent suit. When we exchanged rings, we didn't just promise to love each other. We promised to survive. We moved into a cramped, drafty apartment with a leaky ceiling, and David converted a freezing, uninsulated detached garage into our headquarters. That garage became the birthplace of our tech firm Compliance Core. The early days were brutal. We had zero capital, no safety net, and a mountain of student debt. While Ashley was attending galas and posting photos of her European vacations, I was living on ramen and cheap coffee, managing our meager cash flow down to the exact penny. My background in corporate finance became our secret weapon. I stretched every single dollar like it was made of industrial rubber. During the winter, the garage was so bitterly cold that our breath turned to mist in front of our computer screens. David would wear fingerless gloves so he could type out thousands of lines of code without his hands locking up. I would sit next to him wrapped in 3 blankets, running financial models, drafting pitches, and cold-calling mid-sized logistics firms to convince them to try our beta software. Every time my fingers grew numb, every time a potential investor rejected us, and every time the crushing weight of exhaustion made me want to quit, I would look at the empty space on my wall where my family photos used to hang. I would remember the typed letter on the legal letterhead. I would remember my mother's smug face as she told me I was dead to them. "I'm going to build an empire," I would tell myself. Not for them to see, but so high that they can never reach me again. But my mother wasn't done executing her malice. A few months into our marriage, my grandmother, my mother's own mother, passed away. She was the only person in that family who had ever shown me genuine warmth, and she had always promised me her vintage diamond pendant. I found out about her funeral through a public newspaper obituary. They hadn't even bothered to call me. Despite the explicit warning in the disowning letter, I bought a bus ticket and showed up at the church in Boston, standing quietly in the very back row, wearing my one black dress, just wanting to say goodbye to the woman who raised me. During the reception, I attempted to slip into the foyer to give my father a letter. Not asking for money, but just a handwritten note expressing my grief. Before I could even reach him, my mother intercepted me. She grabbed my upper arm with a grip like vice grips, her manicured nails digging through my sleeves. She leaned in so close I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with white wine. "How dare you show your face here?" she hissed, her voice a razor-sharp whisper so the other guests wouldn't hear. "You are an embarrassment. Your grandmother changed her will the week before she died, Sarah. You get nothing. Not a dime, not a piece of jewelry. I made sure of it. Now get out before I have the usher publicly drag you into the street." I looked past her shoulder and saw my father watching us. He caught my eye, adjusted his tie, and deliberately turned his back on me, walking away to pour himself another drink. He was fully aligned with her cruelty. That was the exact day the sadness completely died inside me. It was replaced by a flawless, unshakable armor. I realized that day that love, family, and biology meant absolutely nothing to these people. I walked out of that church, returned to our freezing garage, and sat down at my makeshift desk. I opened a brand new, empty navy blue 3-ring binder. On the very first page I inserted a copy of the disowning letter. On the second page I printed out the newspaper obituary of my grandmother, along with a note detailing how I was threatened with public removal at her funeral. "What are you doing?" David asked gently, walking over to place a hot cup of tea on my desk. "I'm keeping a ledger," I told him, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "My mother loves accounting. She loves tracking debts and investments. So I'm going to track every single action, every rejection, and every ounce of malice they throw our way. I will document it chronologically. I will verify it with physical evidence. And one day when the ledger balances, I will close the book." David looked at the binder, then looked at me. He didn't tell me to forgive them. He didn't tell me life was too short for bitterness. He understood that this binder wasn't about revenge. It was about self-preservation. It was my psychological firewall. "Then let's make sure the rest of that binder is backed by an empire," David said, kissing the top of my head. For the next 4 years we worked 18-hour days. The garage startup began to gain traction. David's code was flawless. It eliminated compliance errors for shipping companies by 99%. Suddenly, mid-sized firms turned into enterprise-level clients. We secured our series of funding, then our Series B. We moved out of the garage and into a sleek corporate office in downtown San Francisco. But as our wealth began to skyrocket, a strange phenomenon started happening. The family that had erased me suddenly began to realize that the penniless developer and the disgraced daughter were climbing a financial ladder they could only dream of. And that is when the first breadcrumbs of their hypocritical return began to appear. Not through phone calls, but through a series of subtle, calculated digital maneuvers that let me know they were watching our bank account grow from afar. But what they didn't know was that every single time they tried to slide back into my life, the navy blue binder was waiting, open and ready for a new entry. The shift from survival to exponential wealth doesn't happen overnight, but when the tipping point hits, the velocity is staggering. By year 5, Compliance Core was no longer a gritty garage startup. We were a force majeure in the enterprise software space. David's architecture was bulletproof, and my financial modeling had successfully steered us through 3 rounds of hyper-aggressive venture capital funding. When we closed our Series C funding round, evaluating the company at a valuation that made my eyes blur, we left our cramped apartment behind. We bought a stunning minimalist estate featuring floor-to-ceiling glass, overlooking the Silicon Valley hills, a physical manifestation of the fortress we had built together. But as our name began to circulate in mainstream tech journals and financial publications, the silent digital surveillance from my biological family began to leave physical tracks. It started with LinkedIn. Because I am a data-driven corporate CFO, I monitor my metrics meticulously. One evening, sitting in my home office, I clicked on the notification tab showing who had viewed my profile. There, glaring back at me from the screen, was my sister Ashley's perfectly airbrushed headshot. Her title read, "Social Consultant and Philanthropist." A few days later, a premium account viewed me anonymously, but the industry and location footprint matched my father's tax law firm exactly. They were tracking the asset. They were watching the stock rise. Then came the physical manifestations of their hypocrisy. It started small. A heavy, cream-colored envelope arrived at my corporate office. No return address. Inside was an invitation to my sister Ashley's baby shower at the very country club where David and I had been publicly humiliated and left with the bill 5 years prior. There was no handwritten note. No, "I miss you." No acknowledgement of the half-decade of radio silence. It was just an invitation, dropped into the mail like a line cast into a deep pond, waiting to see if the wealthy daughter would bite. I walked over to my office filing cabinet, pulled out the navy blue 3-ring binder and opened it. I slipped the invitation into a clear plastic sleeve on page 12. Beneath it I typed a precise, clinical annotation. Entry 14, October 14th. Invitation to Ashley's baby shower received via corporate channels. 0 prior contact or apology. Intercepted during a week where Compliance Core was featured on the front page of the Wall Street Journal's tech section. Status: filed and logged. 2 months later, around the holidays, a large, beautifully wrapped box arrived at our home. It was from an ultra-luxury children's boutique. Inside were designer cashmere baby blankets and silver rattles meant for my son, Leo, who was then 2 years old. Attached was a card written in my mother's unmistakable sweeping cursive script. To my beautiful grandson Leo. Wishing you a magical Christmas. With all our love, Mimi and Papa. I stood by the kitchen island holding the card. For a fraction of a second, a phantom ache flared up in my chest, the old, conditioned desire for a mother's warmth. But then my eyes dropped to the words Mimi and Papa. They had never met Leo. They had explicitly barred me from their home when I was pregnant, ignoring the single vulnerable email I had sent informing them I was expecting, ensuring that any reply from them remained a brick wall of silence. I called David into the kitchen. He looked at the box, then looked at me, his expression neutral, allowing me the space to decide how to handle it. "Look at the date," I whispered. David looked at the delivery receipt. 2 weeks after our competitor's acquisition fell through, leaving us as the undisputed market leaders. "Exactly," I said, my voice hardening. "This isn't a gift for a grandson. This is a deposit on a future transaction." I didn't open the blankets. I didn't let Leo touch the silver rattles. Instead, I carefully placed everything back into the box, resealed it with heavy-duty packaging tape and printed a shipping label. I addressed it directly to my parents' estate. Across the top of the box, in thick, black permanent marker, I wrote 2 words: "Return to sender." Before the courier picked it up, I took a high-resolution photograph of the sealed box and the handwritten card. I walked back to my office, opened the navy binder and logged it. Entry 17, December 22nd. Unsolicited luxury items sent to minor child by maternal grandparents. No prior attempt at reconciliation or acknowledgement of maternal banishment. Strategy: documented, photographed and returned unopened via certified courier. The absolute peak of this psychological warfare occurred when Compliance Core officially filed for our initial public offering IPO. The day we rang the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange was a blur of flashing lights, roaring applause and historical financial data. Our market cap exploded past $440 million within the first 2 hours of trading. My personal net worth, anchored firmly in founder shares and diversified options, crossed the $44 million mark. That evening, back in our hotel suite in Manhattan, my phone rang. It was an unknown number from my hometown area code. Usually, I let unknown calls go to my executive assistant, but something compelled me to answer. "Sarah." It was my father's voice. It lacked the booming, arrogant authority it had possessed at the country club table half a decade ago. It sounded older, slightly frayed around the edges. "Yes," I said, my voice matching the clinical precision of a CFO reviewing an external audit. "Sarah, it's your father. We saw the news today. The New York stock coverage. Your mother and I are incredibly proud of you, sweetheart. We always knew you had the mind for great things." I sat on the edge of the plush velvet sofa, looking out over the Manhattan skyline. Did you, Dad? Because the last time we spoke, you sat in absolute silence while Mom informed me I was dead to this family. And then you signed a typed legal document explicitly revoking my status as your daughter. There was a heavy, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him draw in a long, shaky breath. Your mother was emotional, Sarah. Families go through difficult seasons. But blood is blood. Surely now that you have a family of your own, you understand that mistakes are made. We want to put the past behind us. We want to see you. We want to meet David and the kids. Is that so? I replied, my tone completely flat, devoid of anger or warmth. If you want to put the past behind us, let me ask you a very specific question. 3 years ago, when I heard through a colleague that you were having minor heart surgery, I mailed a handwritten letter to your home. I included a photograph of Leo and my newborn daughter, Maya. Do you remember what happened to that letter, Dad? Another pause. Sarah, I don't recall. I do, I interrupted smoothly. Because it was returned to my office 3 weeks later. The envelope had been opened, the edges rough where the adhesive had been torn away. The photograph of your grandchildren had been slid back inside, but the card itself was violently resealed with Scotch tape. Across the front, stamped in red ink by your personal assistant's office machine, was "Return to sender." You didn't just reject me, Dad. You looked at the faces of my children, forced them back into the dark and stamped them out of your life. That was your mother's doing, he blurted out, his voice cracking, exposing the deep, fractured cowardice that defined his existence. She was furious, Sarah. She controlled the mail. I wanted to keep the photo. I swear to you I wanted to look at them, but she forced the issue. She made me seal it back up. That was the reframe moment. The illusion that my father was simply a passive, neutral victim of my mother's tyrannical personality shattered completely. He wasn't a bystander, he was a fully compliant enforcer. He chose his social standing, his domestic comfort, and his alignment with her malice over the basic humanity of his own daughter and grandchildren. You are a partner at a major law firm, Dad, I said softly, the final shred of childhood reverence evaporating into the air. Nobody forces you to do anything. You chose your side 9 years ago. Don't call this number again. I hung up before he could respond. I didn't cry. Instead, I opened my laptop, pulled the tracking data from that returned letter 3 years ago, and printed out the high-resolution scan of the opened and resealed envelope with the red stamp. I walked over to the traveling briefcase where I kept my records, opened the navy blue binder, and placed the document into the chronological sequence. Every single interaction was a transaction of pain they had initiated, and every single one was now digitized, hard-copied, and archived. I was building a case file. I didn't know when the trial would happen or what the final confrontation would look like, but as an analyst I knew that numbers and data do not lie. People lie. Memories fade. Guilt distorts history. But the ledger remains absolute. By year 9, Compliance Corps was an established titan in the sector. David and I were shielded by an impenetrable wall of professional success, security details, and a tight-knit circle of genuine friends who had stood by us when we were freezing in that detached garage. We had built an organic chosen family based on consistency, respect, and unconditional support. My biological family, meanwhile, was experiencing the inverse economic reality. Through industry salon gossip and public legal filings, I learned that my father's firm had lost 2 of its largest corporate clients due to a severe mismanagement of compliance data, the irony of which was not lost on me. Ashley's husband had entangled his real estate portfolio in a series of disastrous over-leveraged developments, causing their pristine country club lifestyle to slowly fracture under the weight of mounting debt and impending foreclosures. The high society social circle my mother had sacrificed her daughter to maintain was quietly closing its doors to them. They were bleeding cash, bleeding status, and running out of options. And that is exactly when they stopped casting subtle lines and decided to launch a fully coordinated, predatory corporate-style raid on my life. It began on a random Tuesday morning. I was sitting in my favorite local cafe down the street from our corporate headquarters in Palo Alto, enjoying 20 minutes of rare silence before my executive board meeting, when the chair opposite me was pulled back. I looked up from my tablet expecting a colleague. Instead, I found myself looking at my sister, Ashley. She looked thin, her designer clothes hanging slightly loose, her face covered in an expertly applied layer of makeup that couldn't quite conceal the deep, anxious exhaustion bruising the skin beneath her eyes. She held a paper cup of coffee like a shield, offering me a fragile, deeply rehearsed smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, Sarah," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's been a long time." I didn't scream. I didn't stand up and make a scene. I simply locked my tablet, leaned back in my chair, and looked at her with the cool, unblinking evaluation of an auditor detecting a massive discrepancy in the books. "Ashley," I said, my tone even and measured. "How did you find me?" "I asked your executive receptionist," she said quickly, trying to sound casual, as if we were just two sisters catching up after a brief misunderstanding. "She said you usually take your morning coffee here. Please don't walk away. We need to talk. The family, we've missed you so much. I've missed you so much." I watched her body language. The defensive posture, the rapid blinking, the slight tremor in her fingers. As a CFO, I am trained to read the micro-expressions of people who are trying to pitch me bad investments or conceal financial vulnerabilities. Ashley wasn't here out of sisterly love. She was here on a reconnaissance mission. "You missed me?" I asked, a faint, humorless smile touching my lips. "Is that why you viewed my professional profile 7 times over the last fiscal year without sending a single personal message? Is that why you sat silently at the country club while Mom stripped my name from the family records?" "We were scared, Sarah," Ashley pleaded, leaning across the table, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Mom was out of control back then. If anyone defied her, she threatened to cut us out too. You know how she is. She completely dominates Dad, she dominates me. I had to protect my own future. But things are different now. She realizes she went too far. She wants to make things right. He's changing, Sarah. We all want to heal this rift." She reached across the marble table, attempting to place her hand over mine. I quietly withdrew my hand, placing it on my lap, maintaining the physical boundary. "Healing requires an audit of the truth, Ashley," I said calmly. "And I don't think your version of the truth matches the documentation." "Sarah, please," Ashley said, her eyes welling with tears that looked remarkably like the theatrical displays my mother used to deploy whenever she wanted to guilt my father into buying her a new car or overlooking her social cruelty. "Can we just meet? Just a quiet family dinner at your house? No press, no corporate noise. Just Mom, Dad, you and me. Let us show you that we care. Let Mom talk to you. Give us one chance to explain our side of things." I sat in silence for a long moment, pretending to weigh her words. My analytical mind was already running the calculations. This sudden, desperate push for a face-to-face meeting wasn't organic. It was coordinated. It was highly strategic. They knew that if they sent my mother first, I would have security bar her from the property instantly. So they sent Ashley, the gentle, compliant golden child, to act as the Trojan horse, to soften the perimeter and secure an invitation past my defenses. "Fine," I said, letting a deliberate note of apparent vulnerability slip into my voice, giving her exactly what she wanted to see. "A week from Thursday. 7 o'clock at my home. I will text you the address. But tell Mom this. If she brings up the past with anger or if she attacks David, the night ends immediately." Ashley's face instantly lit up with a flash of profound relief. A relief that was entirely too intense for a simple sisterly reunion. It was the look of a corporate operative who had just successfully closed a massive contract under a tight deadline. "Thank you, Sarah. Oh my God, thank you. I promise it's just going to be about love and family. I'll tell Mom and Dad right away. She stood up, kissed my cheek, a dry, superficial gesture, and hurried out of the cafe, pulling her phone out of her designer bag before she even cleared the glass double doors. I sat at the table, pulled out my own phone, and dialed our corporate head of security. "Hey, Michael," I said, my voice returning to its absolute, icy corporate authority. "My biological sister just cornered me at the cafe. She thinks she just secured a vulnerable family dinner at my estate for next Thursday. I want our residential security perimeter fully briefed. But more importantly, I need a forensic digital sweep of the open Wi-Fi network in this cafe over the last 20 minutes. My sister was typing furiously the second she left my presence, and she isn't smart enough to use an encrypted VPN. Find out exactly what communication she sent and to whom." "On it, boss," Michael replied. "We'll have the packet data intercepted and analyzed before your board meeting concludes." 3 hours later, I was sitting in my glass-walled office at Compliance Corps when Michael walked in. He didn't say a word. He simply placed a manila folder on my desk containing printed screenshots of an unencrypted group chat thread titled, "Operation Homecoming." I opened the folder. The participants in the chat were my mother, my father, and Ashley. The timestamp on the messages began exactly 2 minutes after Ashley had walked out of the cafe. "Ashley, I'm in." He bought it completely. She looked like she was about to cry when I mentioned missing her. "Dinner is locked in for next Thursday at 7 p.m. at her estate." He gave me the opening. "Mother, brilliant girl. I knew she'd crack if we sent you. She always was desperately seeking validation. Did you get a look at her jewelry or what she was wearing? Is the wealth as massive as the IPO filing indicated? Ashley, she's dripping in it, Mom. The watch alone was a 6-figure Patek Philippe. The estate address she texted me is in the most exclusive gated enclave in the city. There are billions there. Father, remember the legal strategy, Eleanor. Do not get emotional when we arrive. We need to frame the conversation around the historic family sacrifices. We need to establish that her foundational education and the family brand were the direct catalysts for her IPO success. Layer it. Make it look like a family investment that is overdue for a dividend payout. If we play this right, we can secure an out-of-court restructuring allocation before the bank forecloses on the commercial properties. Mother, leave the itemized list to me. I've been logging the numbers since the Wall Street Journal article. She owes us her entire existence. She won't dare say no once I present the balance sheet of what it cost to raise her. She can't handle a public scene. She's a corporate CFO now. Her reputation can't take a public family scandal. We have her cornered. I read the text messages line by line, my eyes moving over their calculated, predatory strategy with a cold, terrifying clarity. There was no love. There was no remorse. There was no healing. It was a premeditated, corporate-style heist disguised as a maternal reconciliation. They were treating me like a distressed asset to be stripped, liquidated, and harvested to pay off their country club debts. I closed the folder, placing it flat on my desk. I leaned back in my executive leather chair, interlocking my fingers, looking out at the sprawling skyline of the city we had conquered from a freezing, uninsulated garage. A deep, profound, and utterly dark sense of anticipation settled over me. They thought they were the predators walking into a trap of their own making. They thought my corporate title made me soft, that my public position made me vulnerable to their emotional blackmail and social scandal. They had no idea that I didn't fear their ledger. I had spent 9 years writing the definitive edition of it. I reached into my briefcase, pulled out the heavy navy blue 3-ring binder, and placed it directly on top of the group chat evidence folder. I ran my hand over the embossed leather cover. Thursday night, I whispered to the empty room. The audit begins. The days leading up to Thursday night moved with the deliberate, unyielding precision of a countdown clock before a launch. In the corporate world, a massive acquisition or a hostile takeover defense requires weeks of data verification, legal vetting, and emotional detachment. I treated the impending arrival of my biological family exactly like a high-stakes corporate restructuring. I felt no anxiety, no racing pulse, and no dread. They had completely stripped away my capacity for familial sentimentality 9 years ago when they left David and me to freeze in that detached garage. What remained was a pure, calculating executive. David and I sat in our home office the evening before the dinner. The room was cast in amber light, the floor-to-ceiling windows showing the distant, glittering grid of the Silicon Valley hills. I handed him the manila folder containing the intercepted group chat logs from Operation Homecoming. David read through the printed text messages slowly. His face, usually warm and expressive when he looked at me, hardened into stone as his eyes scanned my mother's words describing me as desperately seeking validation, and my father's calculated legal strategy to frame my foundational childhood as an overdue corporate dividend. When he finished, he quietly closed the folder and set it on the desk. He didn't explode in anger. He didn't suggest we cancel the dinner and bar the gates. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a deep, unbreakable solidarity. "They aren't coming for a dinner, Sarah," David said, his voice dropping into a low, resonant register. "They're staging a hostile takeover of your peace." "They think they are," I replied, leaning against the edge of the desk. "They think my corporate position makes me fragile. They think because I have a public reputation to protect, I'll quietly write a check to avoid a public scene. They are relying on my compliance. They're relying on the version of me they broke 9 years ago." David reached out, taking my hand in his. His palm was warm, grounded, and familiar, the same hand that had typed out millions of lines of code while shivering under 3 blankets in the dead of winter. "What's the play, CFO?" "We let them execute their strategy completely," I said, a cold, clinical smile touching my lips. "In corporate finance, the easiest way to defeat a predatory entity is to let them over-leverage themselves based on bad data. They think I'm blindsided. They think I'm a soft mark. I want them to lay out their entire fraudulent case, line by line, before I introduce the actual audit." I walked over to the built-in shelving, reached for the heavy navy blue 3-ring binder and patted the spine. "The evidence has been verified. The timeline is complete. Tomorrow night we close the ledger." Thursday arrived. The weather was crisp, a sharp autumn wind rattling the manicured hedges of our gated community. I arranged for our 2 children, Leo and Maya, to spend the night at David's mother's house. I refused to let their pure, unpolluted lives be exposed to even a single second of the toxic corporate theater my family was about to stage. My children knew love as something consistent, warm, and unconditional. They did not know love as a transaction, and they never would. By 6:30 p.m., our residential security detail, headed by Michael, was fully briefed. 2 plainclothes security officers were positioned discreetly near the secondary entrance of the house, completely out of sight but entirely aware of the parameters. Michael sat in the security monitoring room, his eyes fixed on the high-definition feeds covering the long, winding driveway and the heavy wrought iron front gates. At exactly 6:58 p.m., Michael's voice crackled through the small earpiece I wore hidden beneath my hair. "Boss, the target vehicle has just cleared the outer gate. Black European luxury sedan. Looks rented or heavily financed. 3 occupants. They're pulling up to the main courtyard now." "Copy that, Michael," I whispered, adjusting the cuffs of my tailored cream silk blouse. "Keep the audio feeds live in the kitchen and the main dining room. Record everything." I walked down the grand floating staircase, my heels clicking sharply against the polished concrete floors. David met me at the bottom, looking impeccably sharp in a dark charcoal suit. He didn't look like a garage developer anymore, he looked like the tech titan he was. A man whose software anchored the data compliance infrastructure of hundreds of global corporations. When the heavy oak double doors echoed with a polite, measured knock, I didn't rush. I paused, took one deep, grounding breath and looked at David. He nodded. I opened the door. Standing on the threshold was the triumvirate of my childhood conditioning. My mother stood in the center, wrapped in a plush cashmere coat, her hair perfectly coiffed, her chin tilted upward at that precise aristocratic angle she used to project social dominance. To her left was my father, wearing a bespoke legal partner suit, his posture rigid, trying to project the aura of a man who still held sway over a courtroom. Behind them stood Ashley, offering that same fragile, rehearsed, Trojan horse smile she had practiced at the cafe. For a split second nobody spoke. The silence was heavy, thick with 9 years of calculated rejection, returned letters, and systemic erasure. "Sarah, sweetheart." My mother broke the silence, her voice instantly shifting into a high, theatrical pitch of maternal affection. She stepped forward, her arms opening wide, trying to envelop me in a wave of expensive floral perfume and synthetic warmth. I didn't step back, but I didn't lean in either. I stood perfectly rigid, allowing her arms to brush against my shoulders for a fraction of a second before I stepped aside, breaking the contact smoothly. "Mother. Father." "Ashley," I said, my voice completely level, matching the tone I used when greeting external auditors at a board meeting. "Welcome. Please come in." They stepped into the grand foyer, their eyes instantly darting upward, sweeping across the architecture, taking in the soaring ceilings, the minimalist luxury, and the raw, undeniable scale of the wealth on display. I watched my mother's eyes widen slightly as she calculated the square footage. I saw my father's gaze linger on the high-end artwork lining the gallery wall. They weren't looking at a daughter's home, they were appraising a vault. "David," my father said, extending a hand toward my husband. His voice was stiff, carrying the patronizing tone of a man trying to establish dominance through forced familiarity. "Good to see you again. It's been a long time." David took his hand, giving it one firm, brief corporate squeeze before releasing it. 9 years, Richard. To the exact month. My father flinched slightly at the specific metric, clearing his throat and adjusting his tie. "Yes, well, time flies when you're building an empire, I suppose." "We didn't come here to dwell on timelines, Richard," my mother interrupted smoothly, stepping forward and offering David a tight, superficial smile. "We came here to celebrate. We came here as a family to heal old wounds. Sarah, darling, your home is absolutely stunning. Truly, it reflects the immaculate taste we always tried to cultivate in you growing up." The setup, I thought to myself, tracking her words against the intercepted text messages. Establish the foundational credit. Claim ownership of the success. "Let's move into the kitchen," I said, gesturing toward the expansive, minimalist space anchored by a massive, solid slab of white marble kitchen island. "I thought we could have a drink and talk before dinner is served." As we walked into the kitchen, the atmosphere felt like a high-stakes chess match where one side completely misjudged the pieces. My family assumed they were playing against a vulnerable, guilt-ridden child who was desperate for a mother's approval. They had no idea they were sitting across the table from a seasoned executive who already possessed their entire playbook. My mother took a seat on one of the leather bar stools at the island, draping her cashmere coat elegantly over the back. My father stood next to her, resting his hand on the polished marble, while Ashley sat a few feet away, watching the interaction with a hypervigilant, anxious focus. David stepped behind the bar area, pouring 3 glasses of white wine and a neat scotch for my father. He handed them out with a quiet, detached hospitality. "So, Sarah," my mother began, swirling her wine glass, her eyes locking onto mine with an intense, predatory focus. "Ashley told us about your lovely meeting at the cafe. I must tell you, when she called me and said you were open to seeing us, I wept. I truly did. The separation has been an unbearable weight on this family's heart." "Has it, Mother?" I asked, leaning against the opposite side of the island, keeping the massive stone structure between us like a physical barrier. "Because for 9 years the silence from your end was absolute." "We were hurt, darling," my mother said quickly, her voice instantly taking on that rehearsed defensive quiver. "You must understand our perspective. You vanished. You chose to align yourself with a risky venture, you cut yourself off from our guidance, and you left our social circle fractured. The scandal at the Greenwich Country Club. It took us years to recover our standing after you walked out on us. I didn't walk out, I corrected her smoothly, my voice dead calm. I was handed a typed certified letter on legal letterhead, signed by both you and Father, informing me that I was officially erased from the family portfolio. You demanded the return of my car within 48 hours, cancelled my emergency accounts, and threatened to have me removed by security if I ever set foot on your property. My father cleared his throat loudly, taking a hasty gulp of his scotch. Sarah, that was a legal maneuver intended to establish boundaries during a highly emotional dispute. It wasn't meant to be permanent. In business, you understand that sometimes harsh terms are put on paper to force a negotiation. I am a CFO, Father, I said, turning my gaze directly to him. In business, when you sign a contract that terminates a relationship and specifies that a party no longer exists, it isn't a negotiation. It's a liquidation. And you executed it perfectly. Can we please not look backward? Ashley pleaded, her voice rising anxiously as she saw the conversation veering off their carefully constructed script. We're here now. We want to be a part of your life. We want to know our grandchildren. Our grandchildren, my mother echoed, her face softening into a brilliant mask of synthetic maternal longing. I think about them every day, Sarah. It breaks my heart that I haven't been able to spoil them, to take them to the country club, to show them off to our friends. But we can fix that now. We can put all of this behind us. We just need to clear the air, balance the ledger, and start fresh as a unified family. There was the exact phrase from their group chat. Balance the ledger. I watched my mother reach into her designer handbag. Her manicured fingers bypassed her phone and her compact, instead pulling out a neatly folded piece of high-quality cream stationery. It was the physical manifestations of the corporate-style heist they had plotted in their group chat. She unfolded the paper with a slow, deliberate flourish, smoothing the creases flat against my white marble kitchen island. I looked down. The paper was filled with neat handwritten bullet points written in aggressive, cheap blue ink. Every single bullet point was accompanied by a precise chronological date, a description, and a staggering numerical figure ending in a $sign. At the very bottom of the page, double underlined with the heavy pressure of her pen, was the final calculation: $925,000. What is this, Mother? I asked, my voice remaining entirely flat, not a single trace of shock or anger slipping through my defenses. My mother leaned forward, her expression shifting from synthetic warmth into a cold, terrifying mask of absolute entitlement. The theatrical tears dried up instantly, replaced by the hard, unblinking stare of a creditor executing a collection notice. This, Sarah, is an itemized invoice for the foundational investments we made in your life, she said, her voice dropping into a chillingly calm transactional cadence. Your father and I sat down and calculated the exact cost of your private school tuitions, your Ivy League undergraduate prep courses, your European study abroad allocations, your elite tennis coaching, and the social branding we provided to ensure you could enter the high-level corporate spaces you now occupy. We even factored in the adjusted inflation over the last 9 years. I looked at the list. Private academy tuition, grades 9 to 12, $145,000. Corporate finance preparatory seminars, $32,000. European cultural immersion allocation, $65,000. Maternal sacrifices and brand alignment overhead, $450,000. The sheer, staggering absurdity of it was breathtaking. It was a level of toxic narcissism that defied basic human comprehension. They hadn't come to meet their grandchildren. They hadn't come to apologize for 9 years of brutal, systemic erasure. They had come because their own lifestyle was collapsing under the weight of foreclosures and lost law firm clients, and they viewed their successful daughter as an ATM to be violently harvested. You brought an itemized invoice for my childhood, I stated, my voice echoing quietly in the vast modern kitchen. We brought a statement of equity, my father corrected, stepping in to support her, his legal training weaponized against his own child. Your current success, your IPO, and your $44 million net worth did not happen in a vacuum, Sarah. They are the direct result of the elite foundational environment we paid to provide for you. In the corporate world, an early-stage investor is entitled to a dividend payout or a restructuring allocation once the asset matures. We are simply asking for our fair share of the return. $925,000 is a drop in the bucket for you now. It ensures our family properties are secured, and it allows us to officially close the past and move forward as a loving, unified family. And if I say no? I asked, looking between my mother and father. My mother leaned back on her stool, crossing her legs, a smug, venomous smile touching her lips. You won't say no, darling. Because you are the public face of a publicly traded tech firm now. The corporate world is incredibly sensitive to reputational scandals. Imagine what would happen to Compliance Corp's stock price if a detailed, multi-page story ran in the local financial press detailing how its multimillionaire CFO left her elderly, dignified parents to face financial ruin and foreclosure after stripping them of their foundational educational investments. Imagine the public fallout. You can't afford a scandal, Sarah. We know exactly what your reputation is worth. They thought they had me cornered. They thought they had engineered the perfect corporate trap. A flawless blend of emotional blackmail, financial extortion, and reputational threat. They sat there, looking at me with absolute triumph in their eyes, completely confident that the wealthy, desperate-for-love daughter would collapse and sign the check to buy their silence. David didn't say a word. He simply stepped back from the island, folded his arms, and looked at me, a quiet, knowing glint in his eye. He knew the audit was about to begin. I didn't blink. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let a single tear touch my eyes. Instead, I slowly reached beneath the deep overhang of the marble counter where I had placed my materials before they arrived. "Mom," I said, my voice dropping into a dead, absolute calm that made the smile freeze on her face. "You brought a list of what you want. I brought a list of what you did." With a heavy, solid thud that echoed through the quiet kitchen, I placed the thick navy blue 3-ring binder directly on top of her handwritten invoice, pinning her paper to the marble. The heavy click of the binder's silver rings opening sounded like a gunshot in the silent kitchen. My mother's hand instinctively twitched backward, away from her handwritten invoice. The smug, triumphant expression that had been plastered across her face just seconds ago faltered, replaced by a slight, uneasy furrow of her brow. My father straightened his posture, his eyes locking onto the dense, neatly organized plastic sleeves inside the navy blue volume. "What is that?" my mother asked, her voice losing a fraction of its sharp, predatory edge. "This is the official audit of our relationship, Mother," I said, my voice dropping into that flawless, unshakable rhythm of a CFO presenting a terminal financial discrepancy to an uncooperative board. "You and Father just spent the last 10 minutes framing my childhood as an early-stage corporate investment. You calculated the numbers, factored in inflation, and presented a bill for $925,000. But in corporate restructuring, you cannot demand a dividend payout without factoring in the liabilities, breaches of contract, and intentional asset depreciation caused by the investors themselves." I turned the first heavy page of the binder. "Let's look at the actual ledger," I said, looking directly at her. "We'll start with entry number 1. Chronological date: 9 years ago this month. This is a certified copy of the disowning letter, typed on your firm's letterhead, Father, and signed by both of you. Let me read line 4 into the record. You have chosen to degrade yourself and this family by aligning with someone beneath our standard. As far as we are concerned, you no longer exist. Total value of this line? Total financial and emotional abandonment. You severed my trust, canceled my emergency cards, and left me with a negative bank balance while David and I slept on a mattress in a freezing garage. Sarah, that is entirely out of context, my father began, his face flushing a deep angry crimson. I didn't interrupt your presentation, father. Do not interrupt mine, I said, my voice dead calm, cutting him off with the absolute authority of a woman who owned every square inch of the room. I turned to page 4. Entry number 5. 6 months into my marriage. The public obituary of my grandmother. Beneath it is a signed security incident report from the ushers at the church foyer in Boston. My mother grabbed my arm, dug her nails into my skin, and threatened to have me dragged into the street by police if I didn't leave her sight. She informed me that my grandmother's will had been altered under duress a week prior to ensure I received nothing. And right here, captured on our corporate forensic data log, is the witness statement showing that you, father, turned your back and walked away to pour a drink rather than stop her. My mother slammed her hand onto the marble island. That was a private family matter. Your grandmother was fragile, and you were an embarrassment to our social circle. Entry number 11, I continued smoothly, ignoring her outburst completely as I flipped to a clear plastic sleeve containing a high-resolution photograph. 3 years ago. A certified mail tracking receipt. I sent a handwritten letter to your home attempting a bridge of peace. I included a photograph of your grandchildren Leo and Maya, who were toddlers at the time. Here is the photograph of the envelope when it returned to my office 3 weeks later. The edges were torn open where you inspected the contents. The photograph was stuffed back inside and the envelope was resealed with cheap tape. Stamped across the front in red ink is the phrase, "Return to sender." I looked up from the binder, my eyes pinning my father to his spot. When we spoke on the phone after our IPO, Dad, you told me that Mom forced your hand. You said she controlled the mail and you wanted to keep the photo. But right here, attached to page 14, is the internal security footage from your law firm's mailroom on that exact date. Our security team subpoenaed the digital backup when we performed our baseline background checks prior to public trading. The footage clearly shows you, father, standing at the desk holding the photo of my children, laughing with your senior associate, and handing it to your secretary with instructions to stamp it "Return to sender," so your wife wouldn't find out it had arrived. You weren't a victim, Dad. You were a coward protecting your comfort at the expense of your grandchildren's dignity. My father dropped his eyes, his mouth opening slightly, but no sound came out. The absolute, undeniable precision of the data had stripped away his entire legal defense. He looked old, exposed, and utterly hollow. Sarah, Ashley whispered, her voice trembling as she looked at the binder. Please. We didn't know you were tracking all of this. This is terrifying. What's terrifying, Ashley, is the total absence of human empathy in this family, I said, turning my gaze to my sister. Which brings us to entry number 25. Dated exactly 1 week ago. I pulled a fresh, glossy stack of paper from the back of the binder and slid it across the marble, right next to my mother's handwritten list. It was the full, unedited chat transcript of Operation Homecoming. Ashley's face went completely white. She let out a sharp, involuntary gasp, her hands flying to her mouth. My mother leaned forward, her eyes scanning the printed text messages, her pupils dilating as she read her own words describing me as a distressed asset, to be harvested, and my father's strategy to use legal leverage to secure an allocation before their bank foreclosed on their commercial properties. You thought you were the predators walking into an easy hunt, I said, leaning forward, resting my palms on the navy binder, looking my mother dead in the eyes. You sent Ashley in as a Trojan horse to exploit my supposed desperate need for your validation. You engineered a scenario where you could ambush me in my own home, holding my public corporate reputation hostage to extort nearly $1 million to bail out your failed country club lifestyle. You thought because I am a corporate executive, I would pay you off quietly just to avoid a scene. The silence in the kitchen was suffocating. The air felt heavy, the ticking of the designer clock on the wall sounding like a slow, rhythmic execution. My family sat completely frozen, utterly crushed under the weight of their own exposed malice. There were no tears now. There was no theatrical crying. The mask had been ripped away completely, leaving only the raw, ugly reality of their greed. "So let's balance the ledger, Mother," I whispered, my voice cutting through the silence like an industrial blade. "You want $925,000 for your investments. I have calculated the counter damages. 9 years of total financial abandonment. The intentional infliction of emotional distress. The illegal withholding of ancestral inheritance. The predatory corporate extortion and reputational blackmail attempted tonight, documented fully on audio and video feeds connected directly to our corporate legal team's server." I closed the navy binder with a loud, definitive snap. "The balance is zero," I said flatly. "You get nothing. Not a single dollar. Not a single cent. Your investment has been completely liquidated by your own breaches of basic human decency." My mother's face distorted, the refined high society facade shattering entirely, exposing the volatile, venomous core beneath. She lunged forward against the marble island, her fingers clawing at the air, her voice rising into a sharp, unhinged shriek. "You ungrateful, selfish little bitch," she screamed, her face contorting with pure rage. "We gave you life. We gave you the name that allowed people to look at you. You would be absolutely nothing without us. You sit here in your multi-million-dollar mansion, married to him, hoarding your millions while your father's firm is collapsing? You owe us. You owe me your entire existence. If you don't write that check tonight, I will go straight to the press. I will destroy your precious corporate reputation before the market opens tomorrow morning. I will tell everyone what kind of monster you really are." David stepped forward smoothly, his large frame instantly commanding the space, his voice dropping into a low, terrifyingly calm rumble. "Eleanor, look at the corners of the ceiling." My mother froze, her chest heaving, her eyes darting upward. In every corner of the vast, minimalist kitchen, tiny high-definition security cameras were illuminated with solid, unblinking red recording lights. "This entire house is a secure corporate facility," David said, leaning his hands on the marble, looking at her with a quiet, devastating power. "Every single word that has entered this room tonight has been recorded in uncompressed high-definition audio and video. Every threat of extortion, every line of your group chat detailing your plan to blackmail my wife, and every single unhinged scream you just uttered has already been uploaded to our legal counsel's primary database. If you so much as breathe my wife's name to a single media outlet, if you or your firm leaks a single fabricated story to the press, our legal team will file a federal extortion and racketeering lawsuit against you, your husband, and your daughter by 8 a.m. tomorrow. We will release the full, unedited footage of this dinner to every major network. We won't just protect our reputation, Eleanor. We will legally and publicly incinerate what little remains of yours." My father gasped, his knees buckling slightly as he sank into a nearby chair, his head dropping into his hands. As a tax attorney, he understood the law. He knew that the evidence pinned against them wasn't a family squall. It was a devastating, career-ending, prison-worthy criminal paper trail. They were completely checked, mated, and neutralized. "Richard," my mother whispered, her voice cracking, turning to her husband for a defense that didn't exist. "Richard, do something. Threaten them. Tell them they can't do this." My father didn't look up. He kept his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking slightly. "It's over, Eleanor," he hollowly croaked through his fingers. "They have everything. We have no cards left to play. She outcalculated us." Ashley looked at me, actual tears of terror streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. Please, don't ruin us. We're your family. We're your sister, your parents. Please." I looked at Ashley, then at my father, and finally at my mother. I felt an immense, soaring sense of profound catharsis. Not because I had defeated them, but because I realized they no longer held any power over my mind. The little girl who had sobbed on the floor of her apartment 9 years ago, clutching a disowning letter and begging the universe for her mother's love, was finally, completely free. The ledger was closed. True family isn't defined by a shared biological sequence, Ashley, I said softly, my voice carrying a deep, unshakable peace. True family is defined by consistency. It's defined by the people who show up for you when you have nothing, the people who stand with you in a freezing garage and help you build a foundation from the ground up. It's holding boundaries, protecting peace, and showing up with love when there is no financial return expected. You aren't my family. You're just a bad investment I cleared from my portfolio 9 years ago. I looked over at the entryway where Michael, our head of security, was now standing, flanked by 2 large, imposing plainclothes security officers. Michael, I said clearly, the audit is complete. Please escort these individuals off our property. If their vehicle is ever detected near our outer gates again, have them arrested for criminal trespassing instantly. Understood, boss, Michael said, stepping forward with a crisp, professional authority. Ma'am, sir, please follow me out immediately. My mother didn't say another word. She grabbed her cashmere coat with trembling, furious hands, her face white with a mixture of raw defeat and suffocating humiliation. She marched out of the kitchen, her heels clicking frantically against the concrete floor, not looking back a single time. My father stood up slowly, looking like a broken ghost of a man, and followed her in absolute silence. Ashley lingered for a fraction of a second, her eyes pleading one last time, but when she saw my cool, unblinking executive stare, she turned and hurried after them. The heavy, solid oak double doors echoed through the house one last time as they closed, leaving the estate in a state of deep, absolute serenity. The silence that followed was beautiful. It was clean. David walked around the marble kitchen island, stepping into my space. He didn't say anything at first. He simply wrapped his strong, warm arms around my waist, pulling me tight against his chest, grounding me completely. I leaned my head against his shoulder, closing my eyes, letting the last residual echoes of my childhood conditioning evaporate into the quiet air. You did it, Sifo, he whispered, kissing the side of my neck. The ledger is balanced. No, I said, opening my eyes and looking at him, a genuine radiant smile finally spreading across my face. The ledger is closed permanently. We don't live by balance sheets anymore, David. We live by love. I walked over to the kitchen island, picked up the handwritten invoice for $925,000, and walked over to the sleek stainless steel trash bin. Without a single ounce of hesitation or regret, I dropped her paper inside. Then I took the heavy navy blue 3-ring binder, walked back to my office filing cabinet, and slid it into the furthest, deepest corner of the bottom drawer. It was no longer a weapon. It was just a relic of a past that could never touch me again. An hour later, David's mother returned with our children. The grand foyer, which had been a high-stakes corporate battlefield just an hour prior, was instantly filled with the chaotic, beautiful, and vibrant sounds of true life. 4-year-old Leo came sprinting down the hallway, his little sneakers squeaking against the polished floor, his arms flying high into the air. Mommy! Daddy! Look what I drew at Grandma's house. He lunged into my arms, throwing his small, warm hands around my neck, pressing his cheek against mine. Right behind him, David caught our 2-year-old daughter, Maya, lifting her high into the air as she let out a cascade of pure, unpolluted laughter. David and I caught each other's eyes over the heads of our children. We had built an empire, yes. We had achieved a $44 million net worth, and our company was a titan in the tech industry. But as I held my son tightly against my chest, listening to his breathing, I knew the absolute truth. Our greatest success wasn't the IPO. It wasn't the mansion or the executive titles. Our greatest success was the unshakable, unconditional fortress of love we had built from a freezing, uninsulated garage. A fortress that no amount of greed, malice, or manipulation could ever pierce. We were finally completely home.